Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Laura Moody. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Feed Education and Research. I'm joined by Matt Sutton-Vermeulen and Garth Boyd, both principals at the Context Network. In this webinar, we're going to explore ag carbon markets and why the feed industry should be paying attention to them. With a mission to advance the understanding and trust in a sustainable animal feed and pet food supply chain, iFeeder is serving up this third webinar as a part of a series to inform the industry and raise awareness of our sustainability roadmap project. The project will assess industry stakeholder needs for the animal food industry and help to understand what resources are needed for continuous improvement. Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk to us a little bit about ag carbon markets.
When it comes to monetization of carbon or how people turn the concept of carbon into money, it breaks down into two simple buckets. One are the compliance markets. And this has to deal with entities that have a cap on their GHG emissions. The best example of that and the relevant example in the US, of course, is the California market. The state itself has limitations that it's put on big emitters. And that's enabled a carbon market to come about because they have to purchase credits to deal with any gaps that they have in their commitments to GHG emission reductions. The second side of it has to deal with the voluntary markets. The voluntary markets include the registries as well as programs that are out there, and we'll talk in more detail about those. But these are ways that organizations can come to them and purchase carbon that has been quantified, measured, reported, and verified, that they can then take credit for that purchase to offset their emissions as well. This slide gives us some examples of players and entities that play an important role today in our voluntary carbon market in the US. If we start at that top row, these are the registries that we talked about. Vera, Climate Action Reserve, American Carbon Registry, the Gold Standard. These are all ways that people can write protocols and issue and certify credits that we talked about. You'll go through a list of some very highly relevant protocols that have been written and are available specific to the feed industry. When it comes to carbon programs, these are not markets themselves, but they're ways to develop and aggregate projects that can bring together larger carbon sources. Think about how volume is brought together or aggregated to make larger purchases available for people that want to purchase bigger size credits. So there's continues to be a proliferation around these programs, and it's nonstop. And they mature and they grow, and they're developing and learning from these things every day. Then if you think about the verifiers, and if you think about, again, go back to the diamond market, and there are people that verify the quality of diamonds, the characteristics of those diamonds. Verifiers are responsible for auditing the practices and the outcomes to ensure that there's quality in the carbon itself within the registries and within programs. Then there's intermediaries that people can go to and say, hey, I need to buy 1 million credits, where can I go? And they pool credits together to get those things. And then, of course, there's the end side of the market and the large entities that are fulfilling their sustainability goals or their corporate social responsibility goals or their ESG goals.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. Garth, you and I, we first worked on a project almost a decade ago together in the carbon space when we were working on a conservation innovation grant. And carbon kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit, but now there's been this amazing explosion in this space relative to agriculture. What's really driving that right now?
I think the interest in activity in soil health and the recognition by a lot of entities that are making commitments to reduce their greenhouse gas footprint emissions. We could go through a long list: Coca-Cola, Microsoft, American Air, the Corsia, which is the International Aviation Group, and many, many others that are voluntarily trying to reduce their environmental footprint. And the headline is always greenhouse gases. Of course, there's efforts with water and many other metrics, but that has created a lot of interest because many of these companies are very interested in nature-based solutions. Think of an airline. How do they reduce their emissions? There will come the day when they can utilize perhaps biofuels for aviation, and little tweaks here and there with maybe more efficient lighting and things like that. But they do not have the ability to sequester carbon. They emit carbon.
So you gave some examples of corporate America, maybe and global in the transportation space or the logistics space. But when at least within the food space, we are seeing a lot of the corporate food companies, the consumer-facing companies, creating science-based targets and commitments. And so what role do they think carbon markets have in their commitments?
Yeah, the carbon markets are very important because the developers will typically utilize a registry. Matt showed us examples of registries and developers and programs. But this slide that just came up here is an example of industry organizations responding to pressure from food retailers, who are responding to pressure from investors on ESG, environmental, social governance metrics on how these companies are performing. And so these markets are bringing in money from sectors sometimes completely outside the food chain to agriculture and creating these practice changes or technology implementation. And so agriculture is a solution provider for climate change. But without these markets, the uptake, the adoption of these technologies and or practice changes would not be nearly what it is with the advent of these new markets. On the enteric methane side, for ruminants, we're talking dairy and beef cattle, a lot of methane is emitted, like for a dairy cow, 3 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per cow per year. And there are feed additives that are being researched and are coming to market, as well as some existing feed additives. And there are 2 protocols right now, one that exists with Vera and one that exists with the gold standard, which is basically a set of rules for how you, as a livestock, as a dairy farmer or a cattleman, can generate credits should you use a feed additive that qualifies, based upon the protocol.
Does permanence have an impact on what a contract looks like for a farmer that's looking to use one of these credit markets?
Yeah, good question. It sure does. With regard to enteric, the avoided emission of methane is permanent. Today that cow did not burp. That cow burped maybe 30% less methane than they would have if they had not consumed the feed additive in that total mixed ration. So, if I'm a buyer of carbon credits, the carbon credit generated from the use of a feed additive I'm very confident in that, and it's permanent.
Great. Well, thanks, Matt and Garth, to both of you for being a part of this third webinar in our series that we've had underway. We've mentioned multiple times in this webinar and others the Sustainability Roadmap Project. We're excited that we're actually going to be initiating work on that project in October versus just talking about it as we have been for the last couple of months. If you'd like to know more information about that project, you can reach out to me. My email and phone number are here on the slide, or you can go to ifeeder.org and check out our sustainability page